Good afternoon, and welcome to the Wednesday afternoon conference call with Trusts Unlimited. This is Jim George speaking. I'm the non-attorney spokesman and facilitator for Trusts Unlimited, and I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to this call. It's February 5th. There's a hell of a lot going on, and I will do my best to try to touch on the important issues. This is going to be a shorter call today for a number of reasons, most important of which, when I got up this morning, I had over 50 requests for our initial trust package, and that's job number one. I've got to get those out, particularly since, in my opinion, time is short, and people need to get their affairs in order and their trust enforced prior to the reinstitution of Iraqi dinar. So I apologize again, but I'm going to move quickly through this information. I'm going to ramble a little bit. There's a lot going on in this country as well. As a matter of fact, it's incredibly historic, and I'll try to touch on some of that as well. In Iraq, we see that Sudani and Iraq are launching their final bank reforms in order to meet international standards. Those standards are to include the cross-border payment system with the assistance of the U.S. Treasury. The reason that is important is because in order for them to implement the cross-border payment system, they need to have a global currency. So that tells you right there, they cannot function with the U.S. dollar. They cannot function with the IQD at 1310. They need that currency reinstituted. There is passage of the budget, Article 1 of the budget, which was a sticking point, the establishment of an international advisory firm to assess the fair production and distribution costs for oil. A company called SOMO, State Organization for Marketing of Oil in Baghdad. That's been resolved. The only remaining sticking point is Article 12, which is a dispute over the equitable distribution of oil revenues. I believe that's going to be resolved very, very shortly, if it's not already resolved. Sometimes we're not sure whether something's been resolved or not. We get conflicting information. I've been of the view, and I've been saying it for months, that Iraq is already operating with an undisclosed exchange rate because, in my opinion, there's no way they can consummate all of the international contracts. They can't use the USD. They can't use the IQD at 1310. So their memorandum of understanding must either have a rate or a parameter that they believe the rate's going to fall. And so we're in a very, very good place, and I think we're going to be in the banks shortly. What I do want to do is touch on what's going on in this country, because it not only points to what's going on in Iraq, but it points to, historically, what's going on in this country. I'm going to make a statement here that, in my opinion, the two most important presidents, the two most consequential presidents in the United States over the last 100 years have been Woodrow Wilson and Donald Trump. Woodrow Wilson for all of the wrong reasons, Donald Trump for all of the right reasons. Now, why do I say this? What did Woodrow Wilson do? Well, Woodrow Wilson was, in my opinion, the first truly progressive president, part of the progressive movement. Now, when we hear the word progressive, we think of it in its generic definition: to improve, to evolve, to do better. But the reason they were called the progressive movement is because they wanted to, and this is in their words, they wanted to progress beyond the colloquial constraints of the Constitution. In other words, they didn't like the inherent limitations on the federal government, and they wanted to undo it. And to their credit, they've been at it, chipping away for over 100 years. Woodrow Wilson also instituted and helped to create the federal income tax and the Federal Reserve. What is the Federal Reserve? Well, it's not federal and it's not a reserve. It's a private corporation created, much like the central bank system of Europe, to create a currency out of nothing and to charge us interest to utilize that currency. And, of course, a country needs a currency in order to exchange for goods and services. But this is what I mean when I say they wanted to progress beyond the colloquial constraints of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution allows for the creation of a people's interest-free currency. Why in the hell would we want to ignore that and create a Federal Reserve that charges interest on our currency? The short answer is they needed a laundering system. They needed the money for all of their nefarious activities. Now, the central bank system, which began in Europe, goes all the way back to 1604. If you do a deep dive on the Western central bank system, I think you will come to the same conclusion that I did, that the central bank system, inclusive of the Federal Reserve, is the longest standing uninterrupted criminal enterprise in history. And Donald Trump comes along, and these people know well what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to end the federal income tax, and he's already began to whittle away at it. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Interestingly enough, when Social Security was initially created, it wasn't taxed. But a senator introduced a bill to tax Social Security. His name was Joe Biden. So Trump, again, wants to end the federal income tax, which is primarily the interest paid to the Federal Reserve. Well, what's the Federal Reserve going to use? Nothing, because he wants to end the Federal Reserve. One of the things that he's done recently is introduce the establishment of a sovereign wealth fund. Well, a sovereign wealth fund is a fund that is created in order to invest the surplus from the budget. Well, there is no annual surplus from the budget, and we're $36 trillion in debt. So the only way we can have a sovereign wealth fund is to eliminate the Federal Reserve and the debt that it incurred. Now, this is why the left is in the streets screaming. People think it's just because they don't like Donald Trump. But the reason they impeached Trump, the reason they sued Trump, the reason they indicted Trump, the reason they triggered some of their pajama boys to take a shot at Trump is because they need the Federal Reserve in order to continue their various nefarious, self-enriching activities. But Donald Trump was reelected not only with the popular vote, but with an electoral landslide. So they're stuck. They don't know what to do. Meanwhile, Trump's been very, very busy. Since he's taken office, we've gotten over 100 executive orders. He's closed our southern border. He's returned the criminal aliens primarily, at least so far, to Colombia and Venezuela. He is going to institute tariffs on all of their products. He's also going to introduce tariffs to Mexico and Canada. And he's involved in a number of other domestic programs like the drilling of oil and pursuit of natural gas, all of the things necessary for this country to be not only oil sufficient but oil dominant. So once he accomplishes the oil dominance, then he can renegotiate other issues. Another issue, of course, is the Panama Canal. He managed to go down and in one meeting, he had convinced the authorities in Panama basically to rescind the deal they were trying to work out with China. Now, had Biden gotten reelected, of course, the United States would have seen China control a major choke point in the Western Hemisphere. So the people that don't like Donald Trump, if they don't like his manner, I get that. But you got to be dumber than a rock to not understand the benefit that this country will derive from the things that he's doing. Now, what does any of that have to do with those of us that hold dinar and those of us that either have or are considering establishing trusts to protect their wealth? Donald Trump ends the Federal Reserve. Donald Trump ends the federal income tax. Donald Trump goes back to Article 1, Section 10, a people's economy. But Donald Trump is also pro-global currencies, and he's also pro-cryptos. Donald Trump put 4 trillion dinar in our possession. The Treasury has 4 trillion dinar. If the dinar comes back at $3, That right there would wipe out 1/3 of our national debt. Now, what Donald Trump wants to do is not take our dinar to reduce our debt. Donald Trump wants to tell the Federal Reserve, no, this is over. This whole thing is over. He's got 4 years to do what he wants to do, and he hit the ground running because he's had 4 years to prepare for this. And every day it's something else. He's moving at light speed. It's incredible what he's doing. We're going back to decentralization. We're going back to the Constitution. We're going back to the Bill of Rights. Fourth Amendment, the Bill of Rights, is our right to privacy. The establishment of a trust is a way one can ensure that their right of privacy is protected, but it does something else. In addition to preserving your privacy, it can also protect your wealth. We find ourselves in a peculiar position, those of us that have currencies. Because under something called the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act, if we own an asset and we transfer that asset from direct title to a trust, a proper trust, we could theoretically only be sued for the value of that asset at the time of the transfer. So if you have, for example, 10 million dinar that you purchased for $10,000, you transfer those currencies by assigning them to the trust, and they subsequently revalue, and I'm saying conservatively, for just $1, you now have 10 million in your trust. Can you be sued for 10 million? No. Why? Because the currency was only worth 10,000 when you transferred it out of title. So you purchase currencies like the dinar, like the dong, and I'm very bullish on the dong. I've discussed that in the past. Other individuals are bullish with the cryptos, and they have reason to be. So you have some dinar, you have some dong, you have some XRP, you have some Bitcoin. You purchase them all for $1. You place them in trust. A year from now, that dollar is now worth $25. The principle is you can't be sued for $25. You can only be sued for $1 because that's all the currency was worth. Donald Trump is telling you where you need to go to make money. And I'm telling you what you need to do to make sure that you can keep that money, that no one knows that you have it, that no one can take it from you from a civil suit. There are certain tax advantages to setting these trusts up as well. Now, I could go into a lot of excruciating detail about all of this, but my phone's being blown up. I'm getting texts. I'm afraid to look at the emails, so I'm going to have to move quickly. But very briefly, the reason you want to set these trusts up is because they preserve your privacy and your anonymity. They allow you to avoid IRS scrutiny. They allow you to gift currencies to family and friends and control the post-RV proceeds for them. They allow you to avoid the cost and delay of probate, which means no one knows what your estate's worth or what your heirs have inherited. They allow you to avoid the federal estate tax. The federal estate tax can be as much as 65% of your estate, in excess of $12.2 million. They also provide the asset protection benefits I described. Pre-RV, the Uniform Fraudulent Transfer Act. Again, you can only be sued for the value of property when you transfer it out of title. Post-RV, there is something called segregation of assets. By placing all of your various assets in separate subtrusts, you isolate those assets. So if any one of those assets, a home, a rental property, a car, gets involved in litigation, it's only that asset that's involved in the litigation because all of your other assets are in separate subtrusts, which are separate legal entities having nothing whatsoever to do with the litigation. So for all of these reasons, you need to establish these trusts. Donald Trump's doing a lot of other things too, and it would behoove every American, whether you have currencies or not, whether you have cryptos or not, to establish a trust to protect those assets, because we're going to be entering an age of wealth. Donald Trump keeps talking about a golden age. What is that? He's referring to our initial golden age, a period of time roughly between 1880 and 1990, before the establishment of the Federal Reserve Bank. The United States grew in wealth, and so did its citizens. And the United States government funded its activities with tariffs and with government bonds, not a federal income tax. So what Donald Trump is planning, if Donald Trump is successful in what he wants to do, and I know a lot of people will roll their eyes when I say this, he'll be in a holy trinity of presidents, along with Washington and Lincoln. Why do I say that? We look at Washington and Lincoln through the prism of history. George Washington was reviled by half of the nation during his lifetime because they were loyalists to George II of England. Abraham Lincoln, historically, saved the nation, but he was reviled during his lifetime by half of the country, the Democrats and those that wanted to retain the abomination of slavery, and they killed him for it. And they're willing to kill Donald Trump for ending the Federal Reserve. I'll give you one last example, and then I'm going to let you go for the day. DOGE, the new government agency that's going to ferret out all this outrageous expense, has gone after the U.S. aid, and he's begun to release what some of that money's being spent for. It's absolutely preposterous, and it's insulting. And the left has absolutely lost their mind over this. They're even saying that there will be violence in the streets. He's totally broken them. They've totally exposed themselves. And this is where we find ourselves. So you can be on the side of large, centralized, corrupt government, or you can be on the side of decentralized constitutional governance. Take advantage of the Bill of Rights and the wealth that's available to those of us that are paying attention, not listening to the talking heads on TV, doing your own research, and trusting in the government. Because Donald Trump's got got us at heart and doing the right thing for the country and for us as citizens. He's being hated and reviled for it, but the history books will correct their record. The only issue for us is which side of history are we going to be on, because this is our chance. So for those of you that have not contacted us to get our initial trust package, I strongly suggest you do so. It has a lot of information about us, about the trusts, about how they work, about how you set them up. Everything you need is in the package if you decide to proceed with the establishment of your trust package. If you're doing it as an American citizen, I would strongly suggest that any American citizen ought to establish this trust for themselves and their family to protect generational wealth. But if you're someone who, again, has some of these pre-valued currencies or cryptos, for the reasons I've touched on, you really need to establish this trust prior to the revaluation of these currencies. And I think that the cryptos are going to increase substantially in value with some of these currencies. As a matter of fact, I think XRP Bitcoin, which has already increased substantially, will take a real bump once the Iraqi dinar hits, and the Iraqi dinar literally could hit at any time. You can contact us either by email or phone. Our email address is trusts with an S, unlimited LLC at gmail.com. That's trusts with an S, unlimited LLC at gmail.com. And our phone service is 307-274-4122. That's 307-274-4122. Contact us by email or phone. We'll get the package out to you as quickly as I can. I do have a backload of people. I'm going to spend the rest of the day trying to unload all of that. But after that, first thing in the morning, anyone that contacts us, I will get the information out to you as quickly as I can. I'll close with this. The Chinese, who are known for their proverbs, had a very famous saying, "May you live in interesting times." And boy, are we living in interesting times. 100 years from now, our great-grandchildren will be reading about what's happening right now in this country and globally as well. And we can sit on the sideline and chirp, or we can participate in what's about to happen. And I hope that for all of you, you make the right choice. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week. Of course, we'll be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Certainly, if something of dramatic nature happens, we'll try to get out an emergency email and schedule an emergency conference call. But failing that, we'll be back next Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great week. God bless.